you can really custom make the WAN topology that you want. You could do this within your own organization. Maybe I have a class of remote offices to use. Class A, Class B, Class C, maybe we keep them separate for some reason. There are a lot of different topologies, and that's why when I started this thing, I said I kind of want to go end to end and see where we've gotten, because we've matured over time in the requirements of the network and what we're being asked by our different organizations to do. So software as a service, what are our challenges? Inconsistent user experience, right? Most of my users, they expect, probably at home they have a 50, 100 meg Comcast Blast service, and they're connecting to these software sites, and they expect the same experience at the office. I may not be able to get that kind of surrogate speed at the office. So what do? I've got to separate business relevant traffic from business irrelevant. My OneDrive traffic, that file sharing traffic that was on my computer for the corporate environment was business critical, but Dropbox not so much. So at some point you've got to make some decisions from an organization perspective. And then dynamic failover when necessary. If I've got this configured and I've got to get out to Office 365, what if I'm at this remote office and I lose my internet connection, right? I installed that internet connection so I could quickly get out to Office 365. Do I have the capability to then backhaul that internet traffic across the MPLS and then go out through my headquarters internet connection? And then once service is restored, does it fall back, right? Standard failover questions that we've had for a long time, but is your environment really configured to allow for that? Challenges of software as a service. Now, software as a service was tough, but then 2017 comes along and we introduce infrastructure as a service. This tends to be way more business relevant than potentially software as a service, right? Whether you're consuming Azure, whether you're consuming resources in Amazon's cloud or Google Cloud, now we have moved those enterprise workloads from our headquarters, where in this presentation I'm assuming your data center lies, out to the cloud. Probably not all of it. So again, I need to maintain that connectivity. Some of the challenges that we see associated with this, just increasing complexity. I'm a CCNP and route switch. I'm working on my CCIE. The reality of this topology, it's not undoable, certainly, but there are a lot of things to consider as you go through it and ways that you're going to weight different metrics, and it's a lot to think through. Redistribution points, again, how do we do that failover systematically? There are challenges, especially if I want to focus on, I've got these multiple paths, which one's my best path? Now, I'm kind of making the assumption I should go out my direct internet connection. But I've seen for some remote locations, the internet's not that great. You might be 60, 70 milliseconds of latency. If I can backhaul across the MPLS faster to a data center that sits right next to an AWS node or something, I may be able to get 30, 40 milliseconds across that leg and much better performance. So how am I architecting my network to make those decisions that is going to give my organization the best possible service that it has to offer? And that may center around different required SLAs for workloads. Applications are all written differently. I've worked with some that 500 milliseconds was too much of an outage for them to handle, which I had to say, I'm sorry, because that's too stringent. Others are more forgiving, but a lot of times we do have certain SLAs that are tied to these workloads out in the cloud. All right. See, now we're getting to the exciting stuff. 2018. You like my critters that I drew here? We have viruses, we have malware, we have all kinds of security concerns in this kind of hyper-connected space, right? I've got remote offices with users. They've got mobile devices. They've got smartwatches. I've got a headquarters that has its own cloud. I'm consuming software as a service, infrastructure as a service. I've got mobile users that are potentially VPNing into some of these services. I've got home office users who they've got Xboxes and PlayStations and smart bulbs and Ring doorbells and all kinds of things that can be compromised, and teenagers that are just out doing stuff on the internet, and that's a lot of exposure for my organization. So greater risk exposure, BYOD, and mobile threats. I mean, anything that runs software at this point seems like it can be a target. There was a software known as Weeping Angel, and essentially it was a virus that targeted Samsung TVs, right? Because they're running software, and generally the security on that is weaker than maybe your Windows PC or your Mac or whatever. And so those vulnerabilities are definitely being written, and the more things that get put on your network, and I'm not sure about you guys, but I doubt anybody would tell me they were plugging in a Samsung TV into the network. They would just go, oh, there's a port, and they plug it in, right? Our exposure to risk is growing dramatically. But we're still required to provide full connectivity between all these locations. People need access to their applications, and to do it securely. Now, think back to the 2011 drawing. What did I have? Headquarters and internet above that. I could install a firewall and web security and email security and do some really good filtering there. But now my attack surface has just grown to pretty much every endpoint. And so we almost really need enterprise-grade filtering capabilities within, or overall, I should say, for all of these remote offices. What can we do with mobile users? So anytime somebody's ingressing or egressing part of the organization, we've got some filtering and monitoring going on. All right, and finally, 2019, I just called this connectivity everywhere, right? We might have more internet connections. We might have more endpoint devices. We obviously still have our security concerns. We're calling this multi-cloud. We've got all these different institutions, and monitoring that and giving performance perspectives are challenging. Now, I left this wide open because it's 2019. I want to give you guys an opportunity to just take a second to think about the challenges involved with your WAN that you see in 2019. You may be more of a 2017 WAN person at this point, as far as what your organization has invested in. I don't know how many of you have software as a service. We did a straw poll and we've got that. How many are in AWS? How many have mobile users connecting into their infrastructure? I would wager many of you. But as we kind of step through this, keep in mind a lot of organizations have faced many of these challenges already. I'll explain how SD-WAN is a solution for those challenges. And so anytime you're thinking about your infrastructure from an SD-WAN perspective, this is going to allow you to be secure, allow you to be agile and responsive to whatever challenges may come up. Any needs of the organization. If we had rolled the clock back to 2011, it would have been hard to predict this topology, right? And it's not been that many years, especially as I consider refresh cycles and how often you're going through equipment. This has become a very complex architecture to manage. But it's the reality of today's architectures. So what have our challenges been consistently over the past 4 years? As we have workloads in the cloud, inconsistent user experience. Separating business relevant traffic from the non-business relevant. Dynamic failover, finding the best path through the circuits that we do have and the multiple paths that we support. Greater risk exposure. So the answer to all these things really is Cisco SD-WAN powered by Viptela. And we'll dive into some of the challenges and how Viptela answers those. So inconsistent user experience, separating business. Viptela uses a stat called VQOE. Oh, I'm sorry. I did want to say, again, Meraki does a lot of this stuff too, right? So here's an example of preferred routing for software as a service from a branch location. So I can go up here and just define, and it's like a Google search thing, right? I start typing in Salesforce. Salesforce comes up. Office 365, Dropbox, WebEx. I set my preferred uplink, and then failover if poor performance is a performance class that we defined. And that's for data primary. So again, they really try and make that very straightforward. Viptela will look at this in a couple different ways. You can see essentially, here's one topology. As I'm trying to access these cloud resources, they've got a VQOE, a quality of experience score that they refer to. So in this topology, I'm accessing Office 365, Google, Dropbox, and they'll establish a VQOE score for that link, doing polling, looking at loss, looking at latency, all that kind of stuff, and then we can shift workloads back and forth. If I have a slightly different topology, again, where I'm backhauling to my primary data center, I'm backhauling to my headquarters, no problem. We've got a VQOE score for that link. So it's going to send out those probes and just continually monitor the performance and shift those automatically. You don't touch it. And here's just an example of kind of what they give. Here's our score. Here's a graph of what our performance has been over time. Again, pretty presented in a pretty straightforward fashion. Obviously, I can look at this and say, whoops, over to DC, or data center 1 and 2, we're having some complications. And at that point, you can start to dig into the graphs and determine, is this something that my boxes are performing poorly? Have we saturated the circuit? Maybe the service provider, I know this has never happened, but the service provider just isn't living up to what they told me I would get from a throughput and a latency perspective. All right, 2017. Increasing complexity. We've got multiple path routing to support and these SLAs. So one of the unique features, we don't really have this available with software as a service, right? Because it's just a web server essentially that you're reaching out to. But with infrastructure as a service, we can actually deploy, and this is the recommended topology, virtual devices to AWS, to Azure, to Google Cloud, where the same device, essentially, just a virtualized version of it, is available that we would install at our branch. You can now extend it to the cloud. You can do path diversity, and they've actually got a chart here that shows from a capabilities and feature set. Cisco offers the CSR 1000V. It's a router. We'll summarize it at that. Now you can get routers from AWS, and they have some default capabilities. But there's a lot more capability and integration into your dashboard. I don't know how many networking teams end up managing the Azure infrastructure or the AWS infrastructure. We may not want to. That may end up being part of the server team. But I do want to own the network side of it, right? And so this gives us the capability to do that kind of end-to-end monitoring, to figure out all the different paths that we have between our remote branches and our headquarters and the cloud. And let's follow the best path. That can be done automatically if you install a CSR 1000V and integrate it into your Viptela deployment. Meraki has the same capability. They have a VMX. So one of their MX firewalls basically is virtualized, and you can deploy it to AWS or Azure. All right, 2018. Now I'm going to pause here a little bit from a risk perspective. I don't want to blow past this too quickly. Cisco acquired Viptela in 2017. Now at the time, Viptela was a leader, if not the leader, in SD-WAN technology, right? So we talk about best-of-breed in SD-WAN. That is truly the legacy that they left, and Cisco has picked up the torch and continued on with continued advancements. Cisco is also best of breed from a security perspective, right? And there are different products that may be somewhat equivalent to them, whether it's a firewall or web security or email security or something along that. but they're best of breed in all of those categories. And so one of the beautiful things that they've done, and this was just last year in the fall, is enable all their security technologies within the routers that we're deploying for SD-WAN. So we talked about all these different endpoints, essentially, that we should really have some kind of enterprise-grade filtering in place to protect us from whether it's the mobile threats or the home users or within our cloud. We need to have something in place to protect the organization. Well, Cisco now offers that. Enterprise Firewall, classification of over 1,400 Layer 7 applications, IPS, URL filtering with a bevy of reputation scores, and Cisco Umbrella. They've also bundled AMP. Now, I don't know if you guys have been introduced to AMP at this point. Hopefully so. Cisco now refers to it as AMP everywhere. We can have malware protection on our firewalls. We can have malware protection AMP for endpoints on the actual end clients. We can have malware protection on our routers. We can have malware protection in our web security and our email security. In every security product that Cisco has, they have in Meraki's MX firewalls. In every security product we now have AMP detection going on. And the beautiful thing is that that is all feeding into Talos. Now, Talos is Cisco's threat database, essentially. As far as I know, it's the largest staffed threat intelligence database in the world. The NSA aside, maybe. But they capture three many as times the traffic that Google sees every single day. They're getting reports back from every AMP deployment, every firewall they've deployed with firepower services every day. And they just have an incredible view of networking really around the world. And they're able to then leverage that information, figure out what bad actors are at play, and that intelligence can get pushed down to your infrastructure. And we've got that packaged in. So when you think about simplicity, right? Okay, I want to connect all these places together, but the priority almost over anything is becoming, I've got to secure these places first. We've got the best in breed firewalling, filtering capabilities, and that's through all those technologies that you see right there. Fantastic solution. In 2019, again, we'll see what challenges kind of come. One thing I did want to earmark that this is something that Viptela can do that would put it out above Meraki, is this idea of service chaining. So I've worked with a couple of clients that are international, and one, in fact, was a parent company for several other companies. And so their SD-WAN requirements were a little bit different because they not only wanted to segment from a security perspective, but from an organizational perspective. Those of you that have gone through acquisitions, you've probably experienced this and lived it, right? So what do we do? Well, Viptela allows you to have completely separate SD-WAN deployments, essentially, using the same hardware. We did this with one bank for compliancy reasons. They wanted all their ATMs on a completely separate network. It all gets transferred back to their data centers and then gets handed off to their service providers from there via a dedicated firewall connection, right? For the international organizations, they have some companies in Europe that they need access to the internet, but I'm not going to plan on backhauling them or anything like that. So we can build a regional topology over in Europe and North America. But then they also had acquisitions going on. So they had I think 35, 40 site acquisition going on. Okay, well, we want to keep this entity separate, especially for now. We get into IP addressing challenges, all that kind of stuff. And so you can really custom make the WAN topology that you want. You could do this within your own organization. Maybe I have a class of remote offices to use. Class A, Class B, Class C. Maybe we keep them separate for some reason. There are a lot of different topologies. And that's why when I started this thing, I said I kind of want to go end to end and see where we've gotten, because we've matured over time in the requirements of the network and what we're being asked by our different organizations to do. If this is one of your requirements, or could potentially be, I would strongly consider the Viptela solution, because this has been instituted and works wonderfully, and I get rave reviews about it after the fact. It's a great solution. All right. Last but not least, all right, 2020. What's next? So I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. It'd be nice. I could really make some awesome recommendations then. But I will tell you what's coming next from Cisco's perspective. Now, many of you maybe attended our DNA Center seminar last year, or we've had conversations about it since. The drive of the entire industry, networking industry, is to get to something called intent-based networking, where you and I are allowed to focus a lot less on trying to build all these pathways together and make sure they stay alive. We're going to allow software to do that. And then we get to start working on what are the policies of the organization. Maybe it's a complex topology like that regional, SD-WAN domain over here and over here. Maybe it's more a drive from a security perspective, where I've got different pieces and components within the organization, and I need to segment my traffic end to end. So Cisco came up with a solution, and that is led by their DNA architecture and the DNA Center appliance, that within a LAN, I can do some incredible, they call it software-defined access, which basically means you plug in, you get authorized to, to be a part of the group that you should be, a lot of times through AD, and then you're given certain permissions based upon that. Plug in anywhere you want, right? It's also kind of transport independence. I don't care if you're connected or wireless or wired, you're going to get the same policy, performance policies, security policies, every time, no matter where you go. We need to tie that all in together, not just for one campus, not just for 5 campuses, but all 100 of our campuses that we might have. So the vision for software-defined anything is that we can start merging our topologies so that whether you're accessing from home, or whether you're accessing from a remote office, or whether you're accessing from headquarters, or whether you're, no matter where you are, and you're trying to access resources, your own private data center, your own public cloud, software as a service, any of those things, we're going to rely on the software to automate the security permissions and tell you where you can go and that kind of thing. That requires a little bit of effort, and they're not quite there yet, but it is the vision that they, and I would say the industry as a whole, even if you look at some of the other competitors, everybody's marching towards this software-defined future. So like it or not, we're going to get there at some point. We've got SDA in the campus through DNA Center, and that will integrate well with SD-WAN, powered by Viptela, or even Meraki at this point, right? There's integrations between the two. So a ton of automation and end-to-end visibility in the coming years. Think where we were in 2011 and where we are now. Think where we'll be in 2030 or so on. Landscapes are changing and very quickly, and software-defined anything at this point is really becoming the only tool that we'll be able to rely on to do that. Another small note, before I get to the case studies, another small note on what's upcoming. A lot of you probably, if you have been deploying ISRs all along, right? You might still have 2900s or even 4000s that have PRI lines or POTS lines, FXO, FXS cards, that kind of thing. To this point, that has not been a function of the SD-WAN dashboard where you can centrally manage that. And so that has been kind of a roadblock for a number of people. Some people I've worked with, they'll stick a Meraki MX in front of their voice gateway or something like that. This fall, Viptela will introduce the capability to manage all of those products. So if you are in that camp, please converse with me because we can accommodate it, not yet, but in the short-term future. All right. One of the other things I felt like has tripped up a number of us in adopting SD-WAN or really kind of sinking our teeth into it is there are different ways that you can approach SD-WAN from a kind of a return on investment. The biggest one that everybody likes to tout is circuit costs. And we see that here. Manufacturing case study, some of the challenges that they experienced to begin with was they just said, I had an untenable WAN as a result of vast network covering 88 sites worldwide. It's a lot to manage. I get it. Balancing trying to grow with actually costs associated with that was a real challenge for this organization. They needed to improve capacity and the performance of their global network. So the thing that demonstrators will run to is this cost savings. And a lot of times it can be dramatic. Sometimes that just gets down to finding creative ways to look at different circuits. You know, I mentioned earlier you can do MPLS, broadband, right? We're transport agnostic, transport independent. For these tier 1 sites, I might still have a real high quality circuit in there, but then I might back end it with a broadband. Maybe some lower criticality sites, I just give them a couple broadbands and it makes everybody happy because they get so much more bandwidth than they previously had. In this case, this manufacturer reduced their MPLS bandwidth cost by an average of 64% per site. So they did have great significant cost savings. Sometimes it may not even be about the cost savings. We just really need more performance, right? And in this case, it's a retail, 3,500 stores, 100,000 employees. So this is a scale that we talked about. If you're worried at all about scale, it's not a problem. They have solved this. I should have included. Meraki has 1.x million devices deployed, all registered to their cloud, all operating. Viptela. This is an actual Viptela deployment. I can tell you, 3,500 stores, 100,000 employees. The thing scales just fine. They saw their bandwidth was their most critical need, and so they were able to acquire 3 times the bandwidth that they had previously. Now, it also came at a 40% cost reduction, so I'm sure that was powerful to the CFO. But the real goal of this deployment was increasing the bandwidth, and we were able to accomplish that.